good morning to the principal, Srividya, and of course to everyone here, and Ashley, to you. It's an absolute honor and privilege to be here. Um, when we were kids in my family, we were never allowed to say we were bored. If by some chance I went to my dad or my mother and I said, I'm really bored, we really got it. I mean, there was no sympathy for us. And my father always said there are no uninteresting things. There are only uninterested people. And then he would follow it up by saying that if at your age, young lady, you're already uninterested, then your gray cells are dying. And that was the end of that. We were never allowed to say that we're bored, because his entire attitude to life was that if you are bored, there is something wrong with your brain. It's not that there are no things to be interested in. You're just uninterested. And if you're going to be uninterested at this age, then your gray cells in your brain are obviously dying and you should be very concerned. And we would just go back and say, never mind, pick up a book, find a game, do something else to do. And it's this attitude that there are no uninteresting things that reminds me that the basis, the foundation of magic is the sense of wonder. To see something, as interesting, fascinating, astonishing, there is nothing that is not interesting and fascinating and astonishing. And the photograph that you picked for the poster of my address today reminded me of one of the moments in my life that I really felt was a life-defining moment. That photograph was taken on a boat that went out into the Greenland Sea to watch whales. And you can see if you look close, you can see the sea salt on the glasses, and you can see that I'm sort of dressed in this very warm thing because of the wind and the cold and so on. And it's one of the moments in my life that I really felt this sense of absolute wonder, to be out upon the ocean in the presence of blue whales diving. There was an instance where there was a mother and child, and they were diving together into the ocean. I've been to the redwood forests, huge trees. I mean, enormous, like the big as a parking lot's trees, and looked at them 4,000 years old and thought, my goodness. But it's not just the big things. I mean, I remember seeing my mother coaxing like a tiny leaf out of its bud in her garden. And that sense of amazement that this new green living thing has come out where there was nothing before. My husband and children, well, at least my husband, have been endlessly fascinated by the insects in India. Something that at least, I don't know about you, I feel no sense of wonder. I just want to swat it away. I want to get rid of it when I see it. But he would have his nose so close to the insect. And I realized that in Iceland, where he was born and raised, they have very few bugs. There are almost no insects here. And of course, in Gurgaon, in Delhi, you know that we have this vast variety of insects and bugs and so on. And he would stick his nose so close to them with the children, my God, look at this, that I used to tell him it's going to crawl up your nose. You should just move back a little bit. It's not that fascinating. But that the foundation of magic is wonder. To never lose your sense of wonder, to never become blasé and nonchalant and just take things for granted, because there is nothing that is not fascinating. Just nothing. As long as you are interested, as long as you take the time to look for them. And so when I started writing fantasy, it opened my eyes to this ever astonishing world that we live in new ways. One of the things that writing fantasy allowed me to do was to bring into my books everything that I found interesting. So I love geology, astronomy, and I used, when I started doing research for book 2, I found that, I don't know if you've heard of Yellowstone Park, right? In North America. And one of the things that has been, worrying geologists for decades about Yellowstone Park is that there's all of this evidence of volcanic activity, but they couldn't find a volcano. And then it was discovered 10, maybe 15 years ago, that in fact that entire 600 kilometers square area is the volcano. That's the caldera. That's the mouth of the volcano. And that it blows every 600,000 years or so. And yes, you've guessed it, we are 600,000 years from the last eruption. Should that volcano blow, it has the capacity to shift the axis of the earth. That is how enormous that explosion will be. When I discovered this, I mean, my entire sort of paradigm of geology just shifted. And I realized that I write fantasy, but there is nothing more fantastical than reality. The more I researched, the more things I found, the more my mind was just blown. I was writing a science fiction story, short story, late last year. And well, it was published late last year. And I started looking into the history of silk. And I found that in the 4th century, the Ming Emperor in China, Mauryan Emperor in Patna, and Alexander in Greece, these people wrote letters to each other. They sent gifts to each other. They sent figs, which were considered aphrodisiacs, wrapped in patterned silk to each other as gifts. And to me, I mean, it just completely blew my mind. I was writing a story about silk and so on and so forth, but going in and researching it and discovering these historical facts, I thought I should just write this. This is just reality. Why do we need fantasy when reality is so fantastical? I started looking at mythology as for part of my books. I discovered that what we consider to be roughly a scientific fact established maybe 120 years ago, that the stars in the belt of Orion are nebulae, right? It's a nebula, it produces more stars. And this was established maybe 120, 130 years ago. I forget the exact date. This turns up in mythologies around the world. And by around the world, I mean in Native American, cultures in North America, in Persia, in India, in Egypt, in Greece. I mean, this is turns up in mythologies everywhere. That Orion's belt is called the mother of stars. It's called the cradle of stars. So we're talking 10,000 years, where this idea that stars are born in those 3 stars in Orion's belt is common knowledge around the world. This has been established scientifically 120 years ago. So when I started researching for my books, I realized that there's literally nothing more fantastical than reality. And so even the people that I use for my books are basically real people. I'm blessed with the most wonderful of friends and family. And by wonderful, I mean they're wonderful, but they're also crazy. And all I have to do is tweak things just a tiny bit. And it goes from being a story in my life to becoming a fantastical tale in a book. So this idea that we live in an ever astonishing world, that wonder is the faculty we should bring to bear on the things that we see, bring it to everything that we see. This to me is the basis and foundation of magic. I cannot think of anything other that is more central to this idea of magic. The idea of discovery, to suddenly find, the Star Trek thing, to go and find brave new worlds, strange new lands. This idea of discovery, this is magical. So never to stop discovering things. Always keep poking till you find something new and astonishing, and you will never be disappointed. Ashley knows how much I dreaded leaving India. I was leaving a home. I was leaving St. Stephen's College, where I had grown up and become an adult and become a career professional person. I was leaving my family, are of course very dear to me. I was leaving a language. I was leaving a culture. I was leaving my friends. And at an age when I had grown very deep roots, I felt that I was so established where I was. People knew who I was. They knew what I had done. Yes, you understand. When you get to be that age, I was middle-aged by the time I had to leave, and I had established a whole sphere for myself where the place that I was in defined me, and I had done my bit to define that space. And then I had to leave. And Ashley knows how much I ranted and raved and kicked and screamed at being carried out of India in general and St. Stephen's in particular. And don't get me wrong, I am the most privileged of immigrants. When I came in with a job, or not a job, but at least work, already there. I had some kind of income. I came to a house that had already been bought, to an apartment that my husband had bought when we came here. I quickly found like-minded people. My colleagues are wonderful. I have friends. It's not, it's not your usual immigrant story. I'm an extremely privileged, extremely, yes, privileged person. But I need, as all of us do, sometimes one needs courage. One needs courage to meet this new world that discovery and travel has brought us to. And it was difficult to know where to find it. I think courage in itself is a product of magic of some kind. You know, you watch a movie, you hear a story, there's a hero, he comes or she comes and saves the world. People do unimaginable things, and you take it for granted because that is the nature of being a hero. But where do these people find the courage to do these things? And so I found it actually in the unlikeliest of places. I found it in the landscape. So I don't know if any of you have tried Googling Iceland, but you should. It's, it is so different from anything that I was used to growing up in India or traveling, around the world as I've done. There is a way in which the landscape is in the process of creation. Even now, as we speak, we have had in the last 6 days, 17,000 earthquakes. If you want to think of wonder and astonishment, I have friends who've had to take medication for motion sickness because the earth is constantly, moving under them. And we're waiting for an eruption to start. As a result, and people are basically bored that it hasn't started yet. They're just waiting for it to start. But the landscape is astonishing in the way that it is bare and new. Vegetation has not yet covered the rocks. The lava is you can see the formations of lava in it, there. You can see the rocks bare before the millennia of vegetation and trees and soil have covered it. And so I would find myself just, asking to go on long drives and staring at things for a long time. And I would take pictures, of course, because thanks to magic, we have, phones at our command, cameras at our command all the time. And I found that beneath this world, or behind this very strange new physical world, lay another world. It was a whole different world of meaning. I would find that I would take a photograph, and if I looked at it long enough, a poem would come out of it. And in that poem, I would find a sense of magic. I don't know if I can, but maybe if there's time at the end, then I'll show you one of those photographs and show you the poem that came out of it, and you will see what I mean. That to me was truly it continues to be a source of absolute pure magic because I do not understand it. I cannot explain it. I have no, in spite of my decades of training, I have no theory with which to explain how this happens. And to me, that is magical. So fantasy writers engage in what is called world building. For those of you who read about fantasy, that this is a common term. When you write a fantasy story or science fiction story, you create a new world in which you then have to orient your reader, in which strange new things can happen. To imagine a radically different world in which there are different forces at play, sometimes different laws of physics at play, different laws of biology at play, different social, historical, cultural forces at play, and in which unexpected things happen. Because this world is not guided by the laws that you are familiar with. This is considered the work of fantasy writers, but this is also the work of magic. This is what magic is, isn't it? It's to produce a new world in which things work differently, in ways that we really want them to, that we would really want to see. And this is also the work of revolution. This is also the work of resistance. To be able to imagine a world in which things happen differently. To be able to imagine a world in which there is no gender-based violence. To be able to imagine a world which is truly democratic. To be able to imagine a world in which freedom that Tagore wanted us to imagine. It was a dream. Remember Martin Luther King, who said, "I have a dream." This process of revolution is the work of magic. This is a process of world building, to create a new world in which things will happen differently, in which different laws will be in use. That is the work of magic. To create a world that is too radical to expect to see in our lifetimes, but for which we are putting the building blocks. We are doing the world building activity of creating this new world, and that we can only imagine at this point. And I think particularly interesting is the way in which you can see the familiar physical change around you when this world building activity happens. You can see cityscapes change. So, you're used to seeing, I don't know, a particular ground, open area, ground, whatever. Suddenly it is inhabited by women, old women, young women, women with babies. Who will sit there? They will change that area. You will see a flyover that you only pass in your cars or in the train or, walking past. You never look again. But that world, that cityscape is changed. It has artwork on it. It has graffiti on it. It has people who are standing in front with placards on it. This work of revolution, this is world building. To imagine a world that is too radical to exist right now, but which you are setting the process into motion to create. I remember when the pandemic started a year ago. Excuse me. You know what is magical? Viruses are magical. You look at a virus, it has literally nothing, no reason to exist in the world, but it changes the whole world. Anyway, when the pandemic started, we were treated, I'm sure all of you saw it, everyone has seen it, just photographs of places that are normally very crowded, that were suddenly empty. What was so wondrous about this image? Why were people posting images of Gurgaon roads, of Times Square, of their apartment blocks, of anything? Why? It's not like we hadn't seen it before. What was it that was so astonishing? Why does emptiness change an image. After all, the only thing different in this image was that you had taken the people out of it. So what is it about this image that so caught our imagination that they circulated from around the world everywhere? So part of it, I think, and I'm sure there are many reasons, but part of it is to see a space transformed before your eyes. To see something as it is for the first time without people investing it with their reality, to see a shopping mall that is empty of people, to see Times Square or these huge squares and Maidans and crowded public places, to see them bare is to invest it with a new idea. You transform it. We see them transformed. That was the astonishing thing. That is why these images in my mind were so fascinating. This is why people circulated them. That look at this space that you thought you knew, it is now transformed. It's a new space. It no longer looks like the space that you know, like the back of your hand. And so that idea of transformation, to turn one thing into another. How often have we seen fairy tales of the fairy godmother with a wand in her hand who turns, a pumpkin into Cinderella's carriage, or something very similar? To see a thing that is so familiar, but to see it transformed into something new. That is the basis of magic. That is where the sense of wonder and fascination, at least to me, came from. To invest it with new ideas. That is the work of magic. Not to turn something into something else for the sake of it. I mean, where's the story in that? If Cinderella's fairy godmother had taken a pumpkin and turned it into a banana, where would have been the story? There is no story. But to to change it into a carriage is to change the idea behind it, to invest it with new ideas. And so magic is also the unexpected. When J.K. Rowling was writing her books, the Harry Potter series, she said that the most challenging thing for her was not to create a plot. Because, as you and I know, I don't know if everyone's read the Harry Potter series or seen the movies here or something. I refer to it only because it's the most common sort of, pop cultural point of reference that one can find these days. The plot is quite simple. Yes, it's good versus evil. There are evil characters like Lord Voldemort. There are good characters like Harry. And there is a battle. And you know that Harry is going to win because that's the nature of that particular fantasy. It's not Game of Thrones, in which Harry would die in book 1. But this is the nature of this kind of fantasy. And so she said that the most challenging thing was not the plot, not the story, not what will happen next, but constantly creating more and more magical things to excite the pleasure and the wonder of her readers. That, that there are moving staircases, there are portraits in which the people are moving around and talking to each other, there are floating heads of, ghosts, there are candles in the air. All the magical creatures that she creates. This, she said, was the really challenging part, to constantly create more and more magical things. And why? Because magic is the unexpected. To see something that you never thought would happen in this place and time. And that is what gives us this, I say this as a literary critic who studied this, but this is what gives us that what the French call the frisson of joy. It gives you this sudden little epiphanic moment of pleasure. And that is where reading pleasure comes from. When the laws of reality and the familiar suddenly cease to operate in ways that we expect them to and start operating somewhere else. And so I'm going to make a confession here as a writer. People think that writers have, you're writing a novel, you have a storyboard, you have your characters, and you have your events and your plot, and you make this whole chart and so on. You know where you're going, and there must be people who do that. There must be writers out there who work like that. In most cases, I know where my story is going to end, but I often have very little clue of how it's going to get there. And so sometimes it happens that I'm entirely stuck. I have no idea what to do next, where the story will go next, what a particular character will say, what is going to happen. And when that happens, I go towards this idea of the unexpected. I ask anybody in front of me, most often it's my husband, I will say, give me a line. Give me a line, any line. And, he's passing by doing something, he's reading something, he's busy doing something else. He'll look up, he'll think for half a second, and he'll pull out some random line. I take that line and I use it as the start of my new chapter. And some of my best chapters, I think, have come out of this, where you allow the unexpected to take you somewhere that you really don't know where it's going to go. And the joy when you discover this, wonderful new destination that it's found. I've written entire chapters from things like this. And I think that, first I felt very much of an imposter in my writing career. I thought, what is this? This is not how real writers write, And then I attended a writer's workshop in which this very famous author, he said, one of the things that you should do constantly through the process of writing, you can have your storyboard and this and that. He said, when you're stuck, change your position, see the world from a fresh perspective. He said, let's say that your story is in a parking lot and there are people having a fight or something, whatever, and you don't know where this should go next. He said, why don't you lie down and see the world from the perspective of the fellow who's been knocked down, and see that, things have a different angle, different color, different, point of view. And he said, this will jolt your story into newness. It will stop being familiar when you change your perspective and see things from a different perspective. This will change. And so to allow the unexpected into your life, not just into your books. I find that it works with my books, of course, and I thought that I was, cheating my way into being a writer, not writing how real writers write. But I realized this is not true. This is how the mind works when you want to constantly produce the unexpected. But allow the unexpected into your life. Go to places you've never been before. It used to be in the 19th century in Europe that the education of a young man in those times, not women, was never considered complete until they had taken a tour of the continent for a year. They went traveling for a year. They would go and see places in Europe that they had only heard of or read about, and they would travel. Travel broadens the mind is a cliche. But seeing the unexpected, seeing the unfamiliar, speaking with strangers, looking at things you've never seen before, looking at things you've only seen in pictures or read about. This is something that I really can't stress enough. There is so much in my life that would never have happened. So many experiences I would never have had if I had not allowed this to happen. I have been lost in Paris in the middle of the night because I'm an idiot when it comes to directions, especially in new cities. I remember wandering around in the dark in these deserted streets, couldn't find my way home, couldn't find my way to the people I was supposed to meet. And I met the most amazing people in the process of trying to find my way home. These are the stories that will stay with you. These are the things that you will remember. These are the stories you will tell other people. These are the stories you will tell, I want to say children and grandchildren, but it doesn't mean that all of us will have children and grandchildren, so we don't have to. I remember making a huge fuss because I wanted to go to Greece. And as it happened, the people I was supposed to stay with, pulled out at the last minute. And my parents were very unhappy. They said, you can't go there. Why don't you go somewhere else? We have a very rich uncle here. He will take you there. Why don't you go here? We have friends there. You can stay with them. But I was hell-bent on going to Greece. And as it happened, things sort of turned around a little bit and I found a way to go. And If I hadn't pushed, I would never have found myself sitting in the amphitheater in the Parthenon, in this sort of thousands and thousands of years old place, where performances have happened for millennia. Listening to the Israel Philharmonic perform Beethoven's Ninth Symphony with a choir 180 groups strong in the middle of this place. And it's one of those things that, before cell phones and cameras and so on, is etched in my memory. Etched. I mean, so I would not have got married, let's be honest, if I had not allowed this idea of the unexpected to take hold. Do the unexpected, allow it into your life. And that is a kind of magic in itself. The memories, the experiences, the paths on which you will go if this happens. Yeah, I mean, that too is a kind of magic. To be transported not just outside ourselves, but inside ourselves to new worlds. I know this is going to sound terrible and boring and repetitious to you, but read to enter a new world in which you feel as if you are physically there, in which you are meeting people and talking to people and listening to things and hearing about things and seeing things happen that you would never expect and have never seen before. If that is magic, read a book. That's what reading does. This is what books do. They take you into new worlds. So I realize how boring this sounds as magic, but magic is often boring. So you know how we're used to seeing magic as a way of, people have to be taught how to do spells. You're doing it right, you're doing it wrong. Every magician goes through an apprentice period where he or she learns to become a magician. That's what reading demands. Everything that is worth doing, you need to have a little patience for. This is another of the things that my dad told me. I was trying to read War and Peace. And of course, as with all of Tolstoy, as with most of Dickens, Hardy, any of these big classics, that we're always required to read, the first 50 pages is horrible. It's boring, it's repetitive, it's descriptive, there's no action, nothing happens. And so he said that, those 50 pages, you need patience, because the writer is teaching you how to read his or her text. It's like learning a new instrument. It's like learning a new skill. You have to have patience if you want to be able to appreciate it. And so it requires effort. And as I always say, if you don't read, you have to ask yourself, what is the difference between someone who doesn't read and someone who can't read? And that is something you should ask yourself if you decide not to read. Yeah. Learning a new skill is a superpower. And you may think that I'm overstating the case. You may think that I'm using it metaphorically, but this is not true. What is a superpower? A superpower is to be able to do something you could not do before. To learn how to do something new that you've never done before. It's not just to challenge yourself. I decided when I turned 50 that I would learn to play the cello. And the fact is that I haven't managed. I can't play the cello to save my life, but I have tried. And I came here, I found an art studio. I take painting classes. We're learning to paint in the style of the old masters of the Renaissance and 16th, 17th centuries. I don't create masterpieces, but to take some pasty substance like a paint, to take a piece of canvas and to create a whole new thing, after all, isn't that magic? To take wood and wire and to produce music out of it, is this not magic? After all, what else is magic? It is to take 2 things or 3 things or 20 things that have nothing to do with each other, to learn how to put them together to create this fantastic new thing. Learn new skills. Never ever stop learning new skills. When you are 85, learn how to, I don't know, do carpentry if you've never done it before. I know that my father, for instance, started learning how to use computers in his 50s, in his 60s. He had not grown up with any kind of technology similar to that at that point. So learning new things, I think, is it's a transformation of things around you into something new that is on par, I think, with a superpower. And the transformation can also be within. So we've all lived through this past year with, in varying degrees, some more than others, some less than others, in varying degree, with images and events that have been disturbing, to say the least, that have been gut-wrenching, that have, changed the way that we thought the world existed, that have been very, very turbulent, very troublesome, um, unsettling to the mind and to the heart. And we've all found, I'm assuming, different ways to cope with it since we're still here. The way in which I coped with a lot of this was by writing. I think of poetry as, again, my poetry is not fabulous, like the painting or the musical playing or whatever. It's basically for myself. I think of poems or art as a way of comprehension. Where comprehension is not only to understand something, but to be comprehensive, to contain. And so when there is a response within us that is inarticulable, we don't know how to say it, we don't know how we should respond to something, that something is so vast and so unsettling that you're really not sure how you are expected to respond to it, which I found myself in, and I'm sure all of you did over the past year. It allows you to contain that thing and to try to understand it. If you create some kind of art out of it or some kind of articulation, for me that was poems. And I'm going to read one of mine that really helped me. It really helped me. I can't even say how. I can't say that it helped me to understand it. I can't say that it helped me to, deal with it, but it was a kind of catharsis to be able to write it. And it's called 101 Nights of the Falcon. I don't know how many of you speak Hindi, but Shaheen is a word for falcon. It means falcon. Where I come from, no gift comes in round numbers. No 10 rupees is ever given. It is always 11. A token of not finishing, not ending, the extra one a harbinger, an invitation, a wish, a granting of plenty, of more to come. Auspicious, we call it. A bringing to the fore of a promise for the years before the young. Where I come from, there is a tale of a clever woman who staved off death with 1,000 tales, each one saved for another night won, a full 1,001. Where I come from, legend has it that women sat vigil, not one night or two, not a couple, a handful, a dozen, a few. Stories are told in hushed tones of a full 101. Every thrower of stones has heard it, every wielder of guns. Songs are sung of the women of the night who spread their wings, became falcons, and took flight. So I wrote this because I was simply unable to know how to deal with what I was with what I was looking at, and the events that were happening around me. And I want to end with another poem. And this one is, I'll explain why I'm reading it as soon as I'm done. But this one to me is pure material magic, and you'll see when I read it. So this one was written for Ashley and Ashwati and all those who are sending who are sending food, excuse me, all those who are sending food to the unhoused on the long road home. You remember all the immigrants who were walking home. You can tell you're home because they feed you. Bowls and platters filled in love, fried and sautéed and curried by hand, each spice and grain and leaf chosen with care because you're home. And they need you to know how good it is to have you in the circle of their arms, out of harm's way. You could say that this recent splurge of breads and cakes, exotic recipes, tender meats, and aromatic bakes is a circling of arms about ourselves, a reaching up into neglected cupboards to shake a little love from tins on our shelves. Such a strange thing, food. Hastily wrapped meals, made by strangers for nameless strangers, trapped between the leaving and the returning, so many unhoused, each one unknown. Such a strange thing, food, delivered in packets, hundreds at a time, carrying the promise of home. And the reason I read this poem is because it is possible to make miracles. In the midst of tragedy, in the midst of incomprehensible human suffering, you can decide to make a miracle. You can cook hundreds and hundreds of meals for the homeless and the jobless during the first few months of the lockdown, as many people did. The miracle is not in the cooking. It's not even in the deciding how much nutrition should go, how many packages we can make, how can we send these out to the people, how can we make sure that everyone gets, food, how can we distribute it. The miracle is not in all of these things. The miracle is in the creation of care, out of thin air like magic, to make people with almost nothing else feel loved and cared for, to make them think that they had come home when they're trapped on the streets. That is a miracle. You can be a miracle. I'm going to end there.